I'd now like to introduce Brother Eamon Gaffney. Brother Eamon has served the Knights for over 50 years, and I think he and Don Leander both joined at the same time. And so we're very fortunate to have Eamon. When I rang him to ask some 12 months ago now, would he speak for us at our conference in October? He said straight away, why me? I said, because you've done everything in the Knights that could be done, and I'd like him to share his history. Now, I'd like to just give a short bio of Eamon. He's had a decorated career as an international pilot, culminating in attaining the position of captain of Qantas for many decades. Began his career flying as a lay missionary for the Franciscan missionary in New Guinea for 3 years. Early evidence of a life of service given to support gospel values. Then flew commercially in New Guinea for a further 4 years and returned to Australia in 1970 to take up a position as a commercial pilot in Cairns. Leading to his career as a pilot has been interwoven with his service as a Knight. Joined the Cairns branch of the Knights of Southern Cross and became diocesan councillor and was elected state council in 1974. When he was moved to Brisbane 10 years later, he joined Brisbane Branch 9, where he continued his contribution to the Knights and on state council until 1990. During that time, Eamon was elected state chairman for 3 years. Further exemplifying his contribution, he served on the board of Southern Cross Care for 25 years, holding the position of secretary for most of those years. Eamon was a piper in the Queensland Pipe Band, and I suggest he might have got to bring his bagpipes with him, but he assured me that he had a big day only 2 days ago, so we'll forgive him for not bringing them with him. He's a high demand to this very day. He has played the bagpipes at the funerals of many brother Knights. Eamon is married to Eileen, and they have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. Eamon's service to the Knights has spanned half of all the years the order has been existed in Queensland. He is well placed to address us with his reflection on the past and future of the order. His paper is titled KSCQ 100 Years of Dedicated, Faithful and Fraternal Service, Our Successes and a Renewed Vision for the Next 100 Years. Please join me in welcoming Eamon.
Thanks, Chairman Michael, Josephine and brothers. Well, I don't know, all that business really didn't need to be done, but I had a phone call yesterday morning from Mike from Hilton, and I was halfway between St Peter and Paul's church here at a funeral yesterday morning where I was playing the pipes, going out to Haven, to the graveyard, but he was starting to pick my brains and sort of asking me questions about what I've done and what I haven't done and everything else. But anyway, I'm very grateful to have been asked to say a few words about the history of the order over the last 100 years. I know that brothers, we're sort of, I'd say, really happy that we've been able to now celebrate the 100 years of the order here in Queensland. I know we're a little bit late on it, but we should have been back on the 21st of October. But anyway, we're here today, and please God, this conference will go ahead, and the Mass tonight, and celebration afterwards. The order has been a truly important part of my life since February 1970. Having been admitted to the order, as was mentioned before, along with Don Leander here, and the two of us have sort of been supportive of each other and sort of worked with the order for, well, it's 50 years, and it's hard to believe, but it's here, and Don's here today. The other one that was in the apologies today was Alf Rowan. Now, maybe Alf is coming tonight, I'm not sure. But Alf, no, not coming? Okay, yeah. But Alf has given his life to the order as well, and to Southern Cross Homes and Southern Cross Care. So it's a pity that Alf's not be able to be with us today anyway. As I say, when I joined the order, I was actually resident in Papua New Guinea. And in those days, the Queensland branch of the order also administered the Port Moresby branch in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. And that was the case pretty well up until independence in 1975. Although I was born in Melbourne and having been brought up in a strong Irish Catholic family, I went to school at St Kevin's Christian Brothers College, same school of course as the Archbishop. I was about 4 years ahead of him, but we both went to St Kevin's in Melbourne. But all the time of my membership in the order was here in Queensland, even though I still had strong ties in Victoria. It was great to see some representation from Victoria here today. Growing up, I only had a vague idea of the operations of the order. My father being a member, and my grandfather, Tim Gaffney, was one of the original members in 1919 in Melbourne. But of course, as a young teenager, we only knew that Dad went off to some special meetings and we didn't know much more else about it. That was the period, of course, of Archbishop Mannix, YCW, Arthur Caldwell, Bob San Maria, all very much involved in Catholic action and the order. Although not familiar with the workings of the order, I grew up in the era well aware of the sectarian divide. From the first meeting of the order here in the Puget Chapel on 29th of October 1921, it was called by the Grand Knight John Guilfoy, the 22 men of various backgrounds, professions and education, all giving of their time and the various God-given gifts that gave us a firm foundation here in Queensland for the previous 100 years. They were all concerned with the welfare of each other and the justice and the community of the church. The initial role of the order, as we all know, was an economic order due to the severe sectarian problems at the time. And while they are still here to a certain extent, things are a lot better now, thankfully, in that regard. There's a few things I've pulled out mainly out of the books of Jack Woodward's and the latest one that we've got as well. So I've just picked out a few of the actual things that the order was involved in over these 100 years. In 1922, the St Francis Society here amalgamated with the KSC, and from that time on, the Knights' role was known as the Bishop's Men, and they became very involved assisting in many works of the church. The Catholic Ball in 1925 was another project of the order. The Nudgee Orphans Christmas parties and picnics in 1926 were a couple of the early projects undertaken. The acquisition of 120 Charlotte Street in 1934 was a major step. The story behind that acquisition of the building is quite something and also harks back to the sectarian divide. 1934 saw the Knights organise a Catholic luncheon club, which had a positive effect on membership, and it continued then for many years in the city here in Brisbane, headquarters in Charlotte Street. By 1950, the order had negotiated the extension of the old age pension for priests and religious. A lot of people probably have forgotten that, but the order was
very prominent in that regard. In 1960, the order approached Archbishop Guildford Young. He was Hobart, I think, wasn't he? For some advice on the secrecy of the order. And he advised, in no uncertain terms, come out before you're blasted out. And from that point, the order slowly began to change with reference to secrecy within the order. Saturday the 7th of December 1963 saw the first public mass here in St Stephen's of the order. The period from the late 50s to the mid 70s then saw a period of a new direction of the order. The involvement of the order in the debate for Catholic state aid in 1962 and in Goulburn with the school strike were positive projects of the order. I can remember that. I was still at school at the time, but that was quite a big thing, that the strike involving the bishop in Goulburn. 1960 saw the establishment of the Teachers Training College and the PNF on the 6th of March 61. We already mentioned, Michael mentioned about the PNF. The first council of the PNF was a major achievement of the order here in Queensland. Bill Roberts, Brother Bill Roberts, as the president, Father Barney O'Shea and Bishop Francis Rush were the main drivers of that, along with brothers Manus Boyce, Les Hogan, Jack Woodward, John McGrath, Keith Morris and Leo Dunn. And Leo Dunn is known, of course, to many of us here. Leo was involved with the PNF for many years, and he continued his involvement in the order and his contributions to the order right up until the time that God took him. So, you know, he was a really driving force. The Knight's contribution to the death tax was another positive project here in Queensland. The 74 State Conference saw a motion from Innisfail for the order to assist in the opening of the Catholic University. Far-sighted at the time, but it didn't come about until 1991. The Sisters of Mercy at Macaulay College was established in 1973 to admit lay students. The Knights were responsible for the funding and establishment of the residential accommodation for students at Macaulay College, Mitchelton, which was the old Redemptorist monastery out there, and it was handed over to Banyo in 1990. But in the meantime, we had to completely restore the inside of that building and everything else. And Don Leander here and his company and everything else were responsible for many, many hours of work in that building out there. Hey, Don. Yeah? Yeah? He can't hear me. Yeah. So, but the KSC also established the Howard Nolan Scholarship, which was a scholarship in those days worth $1,500. It was open to graduates throughout Australia. It was quite a thing, and a lot of people availed themselves of that. Christ in Christmas, the project from the Townsville branch was established and continues today with all the throughout the state branches. Right to Life and Pregnancy Help have been a project of the order since the beginning. The Immigration Office operated at headquarters in Charlotte Street here in Brisbane, with branches throughout Queensland from 1947 to well into the 50s. The Italian migrants in North Queensland benefited greatly from this service, many of whom remain strong members of the order today. Brother Alf Martinuzzi in Innisfail was actually the Italian consul. Without doubt, the most successful undertaking nationally and particularly here in Queensland over the 100 years was the establishment of Southern Cross Care. 1973, the state conference, I remember it well. It was my first state conference here as diocesan councillor from Cairns. And I came down here in fear and trembling to see what was going to happen at the conference. But the plans, the architect's plans and the model of Dewey Court were actually on display that day. Dewey Court was established in 1973, but not opened until 1979 by Archbishop Rush. Yeah. So it was. I can remember also at that conference. He was here last night. What's his name? Brian Kilmartin. Brian was the youngest branch chairman in the state. He'd only just been appointed, and he came to the conference all fired up and was going to sort of, tear his shirt and everything else. And while he made quite a good impression, a lot of the old members of the order weren't particularly impressed. So that was just something that I do remember from that conference. He was here last night, and he'll be here again tonight, I'd say. He's not here today. So Southern Cross Queensland in Southern Cross Homes was established, of course, in 1991. Southern Cross Care in 2001, and it was a truly great achievement of the order here. The effective formation of the credit union by Branch 2 later led to the creation of Pan-Australian Credits. It was incorporated in 1959. 1965, Archbishop O'Donnell gave the Knights the job of setting up the Archdiocesan Development Fund, which of course is now great success and is our bankers, of course, for Southern Cross Care. A lot of people probably don't remember that, but the Knights were the ones that actually set up that problem fund within the Archdiocese. The Deposit and Loan Scheme for members, established in 1966 and operated until 1988 under the chairmanship of Terry Henry. And Terry, of course, left us only a few months ago. The Pope's visit in 1986 was certainly a highlight of the order. Apart from the Knights' involvement at various venues, Brother Les Hogan was in charge of the police special branch at that time, and Brother Les and his officers were given the responsibility of the Pope's security for the whole time he was here in Brisbane. The order also was responsible for, they were the original supporters of the Rosie's mission in 1989, supplying the bus for the use in the city here on a Friday and Saturday night. And that has grown now to, other people have taken it over as well. Initially a project of the Oblate Fathers, of course, but like I say, it's grown now, and it's the Knights of Malta are involved in it as well now down in South, of course. So, what was I going to say? The Seminarians' book allowance is also an ongoing project of the order. We still do that to all the students at Banyo. One of the really positive and negative activities and projects of the order over the 100 years probably is the failure of Pan-Australian Credits. It probably was the hardest event the order in Queensland has ever had to contend with. To have had to deal with it, especially as the order was not really responsible for that failure at all. It happened in the southern states, At the time, I felt it was a complete disaster for the order. Pan-Australian liquidation concluded in January 1991, paying 98 cents in the dollar. I'd only just become state chairman in 1988, and probably the hardest thing for me to do was to advise Archbishop Rush of what had happened. He was, of course, well and truly up with what was going on, but he knew all the internal details, but he gave the order here in Brisbane his full support. And of course, at that time, we had a beautiful building over in South Brisbane, which was actually the headquarters of Pan-Australian Credits, but also for Southern Cross Homes and for the order. And we lost that, I think Legacy bought it, I think, and that was, they actually bought it. But the Archbishop was fully supportive of it, because a lot of the Catholic organisations here had money in Pan-Australian credits, and it was awfully embarrassing for the order. So, you know, it's one of the things that was probably the worst thing I've ever had to do, was to go to the Archbishop and sort of explain, you know. And the first thing he said to me, I can remember, he said, "What was it, Eamon?" He said, "Was it greed?" And I said, "Well, yes." I said, "They thought they were putting money in and with not proper support, and the whole thing sort of went down." So, but he was very supportive of the order. I was going to say now, the total support of all the members throughout the state, we came through that period with even fewer members now, but we're probably just as strong as we were then. Over the 100 years, the order has adapted to many changes that I believe is what we need to do now more than ever. The whole change in the church since Vatican II, and now with the shortage of priests and religious, the role of the laity is paramount. And with this, this is where the order can fulfil that need. You know, everybody says, where are we going to go to from here? Well, this is one of the things, the way things are changing. The support of the parish and the parish priest is vital in our present time. And the support of the expatriate priests, you know, like Father Tom, for example, right? That's paramount. The order's contribution and involvement in the present plenary council must be a priority. The Archbishop is pushing that at the moment, and he does need the support of all the Catholic in the Archdiocese, but the Lights could really play a positive effort in that regard. The objects of the order produced over 100 years ago with the guidance of the Holy Spirit are as relevant today as ever. I've touched on a few points in particular over the past 100 years. I know that there are many projects undertaken within the branches that have not been given any recognition, and even within the church they haven't been, but there is an awful lot of projects within the order throughout the state that doesn't get the airplay that probably they should, but it's going on nevertheless. But just to finish off, the bond between people dependent on each other is the richest source of meaning and applies within our order. And with this in mind, and with a willingness to be open to change, as needed, let me say that again, the willingness to be open to change, right, as needed within the order, and of course that'll make the order prosper and into future generations. So that's my little bit of a take on the last 100 years, and I hope it's been a little bit informative. There was a lot of things that you could say, but I mean, how long do you sort of stand up here and react what's happened in the last 100 years? But a lot of that is covered in the two books that we already have on the order, and it really is, it's great for the members of the order to actually know a little bit of the history of the order. So with that, I think that's about all I'd like to say about the last 100 years. Thanks everybody for listening to me.
Thanks, Eamon. Just before you go, are there any questions for Eamon? Damien.
Yes, Damien.
I'd like to ask one.
Just so I'll say.
Yep.
Yes, Brother Eamon, thank you for that lovely talk there. There are a few things that probably go down in Queensland history that haven't been touched on fully, and that's obviously the great schism of the Labor Party when Vince Gare and sort of separated from the other side of the Labor Party. back there.
Yeah.
And there's probably also another disappointment you didn't mention in the intro was your time with the Irish club and how that is no longer with us as well. So I don't know if you wanted to comment on those as well.
I probably won't comment too much on the Irish club because that was out of my control. It fell over 2.5 years after I stepped down as president. Vince Scare, I can remember quite vividly, and Don probably remembers too, Vince coming to state conference on a couple of occasions, and it was very interesting to hear his sort of take on the whole thing, because he was out of politics at that stage, and he'd come back from Ireland as the ambassador, Australian ambassador to Dublin. So, the order has had a lot of involvement that a lot of people don't realise too, you know. I mentioned before Bob Santa Maria and Arthur Caldwell and that in Melbourne. They really were great supporters of the order, and they did great work behind the scenes as well, you know. So, nothing else.
Just quickly on that, Bernard Hatton from Branch 81.
Yes,
Bringing up Bob Santa Maria, as a boy, I used to call him Uncle Bob because my family knew him quite well. My uncle was Brian Mullins. I don't know whether you remember him. He was a member of the Knights. He was the leader of the National City Council here in Queensland. So I remember it very well. It was a very family orientated sort of affair that we had with the Knights and the National City Council. And also, just quickly on another thing, I'm a resident of Stretton Gardens, which is Southern Cross Care. We had a big luncheon on St Patrick's Day, and one of the guys that was organising a few things, he got up and I'd given him one of our books to read, and he mentioned it at the luncheon that the Knights were the founders of Southern Cross Care, and there was a few people in the room that didn't know that lived there. So it was quite good that he put our name out there, and we're out there in the community.
Oh yeah. The order, like I say, the order really has been involved in an awful lot of things here. That business about Mitchelton and the accommodation for the university, that was actually a bit of a blow to the order at the time, because we had put a lot of time and money into the residential section out there for the students to sort of occupy, and then the Mercy nuns stepped in and sort of overruled everything and changed the whole system, and the Knights were out. But anyway, but we did our bit. We started it off, and now look what we've got at ACU in Banyo. So we can be proud of that. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you. Mike Harris from Branch 11.
Yeah,
Just
Mike.
like to congratulate Eamon on a very interesting account of the last 100 years of dedicated and faithful service that the Knights have done for the people of Australia, no doubt. And some of the things I didn't know that you spoke about, it was quite interesting. And I think that brings to mind too that we need to look into a membership drive in the near future to bolster our numbers. Absolutely. Thank you.
Things have certainly changed completely from like our father's time and the order back then, even in the 60s, but it's church has changed, and the church needs support at the moment. This business we're going through here in Brisbane, where all the inner city parishes are all being clustered together, and to be honest, it's I was only talking to Father Kevin Smith yesterday at the funeral I was out here, and he said it's really a trying time. The Archbishop is sort of trying various things where a lot of parish priests now have got 3 and 4 parishes to look after, and really we're going to burn them out if we don't sort of back them. That's the thing. So the role of the order, like I mentioned, is actually changing really from what it was as a economic order of making sure we all had jobs for the Catholics, but and that was a very proud thing for us to do as well. But like I say, things are different now, and that's our role as far as I see it now, especially with no priests. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's happening in our time now, But it's everywhere. I spend a fair bit of time in Ireland every year. I haven't for the last few years, but it's a carbon copy in Ireland is what's happening here, with the priests and the vocations and everything else, with, all these weird laws that are going through the Parliament. It's the same there as it is here, There we go. Yeah. David.
And can I just ask your assessment in terms of what are the learnings that came out of the Pan-Pac collapse for us as an order?
Well, of course, to start off with, it was awfully embarrassing. Pan credits was basically what Southern Cross Care is to the order now, They supplied the wherewithal. Okay, we had the membership contributions and that, but the rest of the money that was supplied to the order was from Pan-Australian credits. And luckily now, the way Southern Cross Care has grown, we have that alliance there where that helps the order as well, and it's a real showcase, of course, of the order. But as far as what we can learn from it, obviously it's hard to say, David, what at the time we got hit here in Queensland, which was none of our doing at all, but because Pan-Australian credits were part of the holding company, Sydney and Melbourne, the whole thing, West Australia stayed out of it, thank God, and I think to a lesser extent South Australia, but just the order down the east coast that really suffered from that, But anyway, that's we've got our flag carrier over here now with Southern Cross Care, and we should be very proud of that because, especially the way they've gone through the last COVID for the last two years. I mean, that, and the Royal Commission, as Jason said last night, that hasn't been easy either, So, yeah, so that's all. No other questions?
One more question. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you. Andrew Vaccaro from Victoria. First of all, I wanted to thank you for your wonderful historical piece on the order. For myself, it's been very important over the last few years leading into the centenary to highlight the achievements that we had. And most of all, our founders. We should really honour and study the lives of our founders. We talk about how nowadays the laity has to be more involved because there is a shortage of priests, and I think nowadays we tend to look at the priests having to lead everything, the priests having to do everything. When the order was founded here in Australia, they were all lay people.
That's right.
They were all laymen. In New South Wales, you had Patrick Minahan and Joseph Lynch. One was a parliamentarian, one was a school teacher. Here in Victoria, we had Michael Chamberlain and T.M. Burke, who were businessmen. They were prominent Catholic businessmen. And here you had John Guilfoy, who was an optometrist.
Right.
They weren't priests, they weren't theologians, they were just ordinary Catholic men who held a wide variety of professions, much as we here today. And they had the courage to set up the order for the benefit of the laity and to support the priesthood. So we should be really proud and learn the history of those men. Also, you talk about Vince Gare, who was obviously very prominent in the DLP here in Queensland in the 50s, 60s. in Victoria we had Frank McManus, who was a senator and was also an Order member. So the Order played a very critical role in Australian politics at a very critical time, in which, you know, the DLP obviously held the balance of power throughout the 50s and 60s and early 70s. So, and also, when you talk about Pan Australia credits, it was a difficult time for the Order, and as you say, particularly in Victoria, it hit Victoria really hard. And I think it's something that I know you haven't shied away from it. We've probably been a bit more reluctant, probably because it hit us the hardest, and there's probably a lot of soul searching. But I think what's important, we need to learn from the mistakes of our past. There's been a tendency to want to hide what happened, but I think we need to learn it, understand what went wrong, so we don't make that mistake again, and we atone for our sins, whatever you want to call it, mistakes. We need to learn from that in order to be better people. So, thank you very much for your great presentation, Brother Eamon.
Yeah, you mentioned those founding members of the Order. I mean, when you think about it, those fellas travelled from Melbourne and Sydney by train up here and back with no aeroplanes in those days, right? And like you say, they were businessmen and they were professional men that had their own business to carry on, but they gave up their time and their expertise to give us what we've got today. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Eamon.
Can I just, I'm not sure this is can I just say quickly, a bit of a challenge for the future. I'm Stuart Beavers from Branch 1. In my observations, the schools, the Catholic schools that we have, the children passing through those schools are given what is a Catholic education. When they leave school, I've been told the percentage of those that continue with the church is somewhere around about 2% of the people leaving school. I think this is a real challenge to us. We've got to somehow work with the schools. The Knights, I think, are in a position to be able to to make a lead on this. I don't think we can actually bring about change on our own, but we need to work with people. It's a challenge for the Knights, I think, for the future, because there is a problem with priests, young men not moving into the priesthood, as has been pointed out. It's very obvious. And one of the reasons must surely be that there are less people who actually go to church. But added to that, we find that in the primary school children going through my church, there's hordes of them come through to get their the various commitments to confirmation and First Communion, and they need that to get into the secondary schools. That is a requirement. We don't tend to see many of those afterwards, and we didn't see many of them before they reached that stage. So I think there are some real challenges about what it means to be a Catholic, and I think I'd like to see the Knights really look at what we can do to actually improve that situation for the future. So that's a challenge for the future.
Yeah, the Catholic Education Department here in Brisbane, I think it is important that the Knights have input into that, and because they're now controlling. It's different to what it was when we all went to school, because the whole thing now is operated from here in Edward Street, and they control basically what's taught and everything else in the schools, and the employment of the teachers, etc., etc. So, you know, that is important that the Knights have input in that. And one of the ways probably that we could think of is the fellas get more involved in what the Archbishop set up here for the professional men and women in the community. That he's got this thing set up now where there's 3 or 4 lunches a year, right? And that's another good way of communication, and I think the Order really should think about that as well, make sure that we have our members involved in that as well. So that's, but you're right, as far as the education is concerned, I mean, maybe we'd get a lot more vocations, I don't know, but, you know, there we go. So.
Thanks very much, Eamon. Now I'd like to call upon Brother Kevin Lappin to pose a vote of thanks.
I'd like to say thank you to Brother Eamon. Brother Eamon?
Come back.
It's been very enlightening to listen to him. I believe that for us to go forward, we've got to look at our past, look at our good parts and look at our sins. You've spelled that out pretty clearly, Eamon, and hopefully with these renewed knowledge of what our past has been, we'll gain insight into what we should do for the future at this conference. I do appreciate your efforts, Eamon, at getting yourself organised and putting on such a good talk. And I'd like you all to give him a vote of thanks with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and Father Dan Ryan has just walked in the door, and I'd like to welcome him, and we'll reintroduce him formally before he speaks. Now it's time to have a break in the morning tea, so I should be back seated at 10:25, please. Thank you.